Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast. This is Jenn Klein, and today I'm joined with Haley Cooper. Haley is a certified fundraising executive, CEO, and founder of the Savvy Fundraiser, a nonprofit consulting firm. She also started a nonprofit when she was 24 called the PB&J Foods.
You are the kind of person who wants to improve the lives of others, but you need to take pride in your everyday actions. You Are a Philanthropist believes that every act of goodwill deserves to be recognized as philanthropy. Each individual action you take impacts another's life. Believe that what you do makes a difference. So call yourself a philanthropist and start a ripple effect of generosity that boomerangs back to you. Go to youareaphilanthropist.com/shop. Style your outside to match your inside. Choose a t-shirt, hoodie, or bag to show how much you love giving to others. That's youareaphilanthropist.com/shop.
Hey y'all, I just want to remind you that I need you to subscribe, rate, and review to this podcast. If you're enjoying it and want more conversations like this and want to help people get more involved with philanthropy, please subscribe, rate, and review. I want to thank you to the people who have already rated this podcast 5 stars. Please click to rate it 5 stars. And here is some awesome reviews. I love hearing the different stories from a variety of people's personalities. We all can contribute with the strengths we have in making the world a better place for all of us to live in. Here's another one. I really enjoy this podcast. It's encouraging to see that I don't have to be a multimillionaire who created a philanthropic foundation to impact people. It's my small gifts of my time and resources that add up. I am a philanthropist. And here's another. There are opportunities all around at an early age to remind us to look out for each other. It's a lifelong journey of seeing the opportunities and acting in them. Thanks for a great reminder. Listeners, please do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review right now so more people can hear more from us and learn more about philanthropy.
Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast with Jenn Klein, a certified fundraising executive and philanthropic entrepreneur. This show is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you to make a difference in your community and our world. Jenn believes all acts of kindness matter, and this show is designed to help you take pride in your everyday actions of improving the lives of others and making a change in the world. Now, here's Jenn.
Haley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jenn, for having me.
I'm so glad we connected. We talked a little bit offline about the nonprofit you started, and I wanted to hear more about your consulting firm. So why don't you take us away? Tell us your story about how you got started in nonprofits.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. In 2011, I graduated with a degree in kinesiology, and I thought that I wanted to be an exercise physiologist or a registered dietitian, and it was in kind of the tail end of the recession, and so finding a job straight out of college was really challenging, especially for what I wanted to do, which was I would have to go to more school. So I was living at home at the time, and I attended my parents' church one Sunday, and there was someone talking on the stage about a missions trip to Malawi, Africa. And while my family has been historically very involved locally here in Orange County, philanthropically, both giving money and time, I was there and I was like nudging my parents and I was like, guess where I'm going this summer? I'm going to Malawi. And they were like, are you sure? Like, you just heard one thing about this country. Like, I literally had to go home and Google where Malawi, Africa was, because it's this little sliver of Africa. And I just really felt called to go on a missions trip. Again, I had served locally at different food banks, had also been to Mexico to build homes a few times, but had never really been out of the country. And so I decided that summer to, instead of using my college money, I used it to save up to buy a trip. My flight, it was about, I think, $3,000 overall to go fly there and then pay for all the food and travel and everything. So went that summer, didn't really know what to expect. And I feel like a lot of times when you go on a missions trip, you go, you have a really good time, you get fueled up, and you're like, I'm going to go change the world when I get home. And then after that 2 week high, it all goes away and you go back to your daily life. And again, I live in Orange County, so go back to, living that beach life, and you kind of forget the experience that you had. And during that time, I was applying to different colleges to become a registered dietitian because that's, again, what I thought I wanted to do. And was living at home, and I wasn't getting into any schools. I was getting denial letter after denial letter, and just that feeling of rejection kept coming up. And there was one night where I just broke down and I was like, God, show me what I am supposed to do. Like, show me that next step. Like, I am just surrendering it all to you because clearly this is not working out. So literally that next day, I get a phone call from the person who had led that trip, and they were like, hey, we need to have a meeting. I have a project. I have a nonprofit that I want to develop. Are you interested? And I was like, okay, like, sure, let's just have this meeting. So I met with this guy who was a part of another organization, and they were trying to end all malaria deaths for children under 5. But what they found was that these children were suffering from malnutrition, so they weren't healing from their diseases. They were dying. And so he was like, well, we said all malaria deaths. Like, we said ending all deaths under 5. So he had heard about this product called a ready-to-use therapeutic food. It's pretty much like a fortified peanut butter paste on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper. And he said, hey, do you want to go make peanut butter in Malawi, Africa for a year? And I was like, sure, let's do it. And he's like, Haley, go home and sleep on it. Like, go pray on it. And I was like, I got nothing else going for me right now. Like, trying to find a job like in the middle of the recession is really hard. And no other doors are opening for me right now. So I said yes. And I started making peanut butter in my parents' kitchen with a KitchenAid mixer and learning, this product. Luckily, we had connected with the founder of this ready-to-use therapeutic food, and they had given us the ingredients. And that was in March of 2012. So in August of 2012, I moved to Malawi, Africa, by myself. Luckily, I lived in a community of expats, so I wasn't completely alone. However, I was the only American at the time, but it was surrounded by a hospital, and they had a bunch of medical students coming from the Netherlands and Germany to come serve there. So I lived in this apartment with no water for 8 months. And we would have to go and get water from a local well and bring it and then heat it up. And that's how we took baths. And so I went, and I think when you go, so now I have on my resume that I am certified to make peanut butter. And I know how to set up a factory grade facility that meets UNICEF standards. And I think a lot of times when you go on missions trips, you go and you're like, I'm going to go change the world. I'm going to go in there and like, we know it better because, I live in a first world country. And that completely changed how I viewed charity work and philanthropy, because I got so much more from the people. And, it was really about hiring local Malawians to run the organization, which it is mostly Malawian run now to this day. It still exists, even though I'm no longer involved. And it was going back into the community and really understanding their needs. So we understood, my first client ever, his name was Ephraim. He was 12 years old, but he was so malnourished that he did not look like he was 12. And he shows up, he had walked 20 miles we were located in the hospital, had walked there on the brink of like almost death because he was so malnourished. But that's the problem, was they would wait till the end, because if you think about it, like, the moms are responsible for all the water, for all making all the food. And if they leave for a day, like, their family's not going to have that. So it's really hard for them to leave. And then, of course, walking like 20 miles on barefoot to a hospital. So I remember that day, and he which is funny because it leads to a story later of where I am now, is he was like, I'm 24 at the time, right? Like single, no idea that I wanted kids. Like, and he was like, I want you to adopt me. And I was like, uh, he's like, I'm gonna go home with you to America. I was like, okay, like didn't even think like twice about that. But it was just so sweet that the joy on his face that such a simple product could have and such a transformational change that something that we take for granted could have a change. I mean, within, I think, 2 weeks, children on average gain 4 to 6 pounds and are able to get this product has all the nutrients that you need. So it has micronutrients, protein powder, of course, the fat from the peanut butter. And so, going there and really learning like it's not about going in and making change. It's about understanding the culture and the organism and the people and working with them. Because Malawians, it's Malawian time. And so there's three different, I learned it was like, I'm coming would mean they're not coming on their way. Like they're going to take a few hours. They'll be here when they want to be here. I'm coming right now means maybe they'll be there in 2 hours and I'm on my way. Like on my way means I'll be there in 5 minutes. And of course, as an American, like we're like time, like they always say Malawians have time, Americans have watches. Like we're like sitting there, like ticking on our watch, like, where are you? Like, you got to be on my time. So it really like helped me understand their culture and like how to work within that and honestly like learn a lot more. And so that was back from like 2012 to 2016. I was involved and I lived in Malawi for 2 years and then moved home and led some mission trips, went back there every couple of months to check in on the facility. Again, at that time, it was mostly Malawian run. So we would just kind of do the oversight from America. And I moved on from that organization and I would say fell into fundraising. As you would say, I became a part of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, which I just resigned from the board. But I've mostly worked in social services or human social services, mostly youth focused. And again, like that story with Ephraim, I always have had a passion for kids, for youth. And I never knew that that's what would lead me to adopting a child and where I am today and committing to even more youth focused organizations and helping the next generation. I remember I was in a shelter. I was a fundraiser. So, as a fundraiser, you kind of are one step removed. But at this time, I was working in a room in the shelter. And I remember this mom who had mental health issues tell her 5-year-old that she was too broken to be loved. And I just broke down. I was like, no 5-year-old should be told that they're too broken to be loved. And I remember she called her social worker and was like, take my child. And I came home to my husband and I was like, guess what we're doing? And this is back in 2019. And I was like, guess what we're doing? We're becoming certified resource parents and we're going to adopt a child. And he has fostering and adoption his side of the family. But again, before 2019, I didn't think that I wanted to have children. I just knew that I like serving children. And so we became certified foster parents in March 2020 when everything shut down and there were no kids in the system. And we were just waiting. And there were no kids in the system either because they weren't being identified or because they were all fostered out, which you would hope they were all fostered out. And so about a month into COVID, if you will, we got a phone call from my uncle and we heard about my now son, and we had fostered him from 6 months to almost 2, and then we've adopted him and have him in our family now. And it's just really fueled the work that I do and the reminder of like why the work that I do. I want my kids who, are, let's say, privileged, I guess, if you will, like see that service mindset and really giving back to people who don't have the same resources and understanding how privileged they are. Because again, I grew up in Orange County, and until I started working in this nonprofit space, like one, I didn't understand what philanthropy was. So I knew that my parents and grandparents were involved, but I didn't know what it meant until I became a fundraiser. And then I was like, oh, like those are the type of people you want. And then like understanding like the need in my own backyard. Like when people think of Orange County, they think of Newport Beach, like mansions and things, but there is like over 30,000 kids experiencing homelessness, like right in my own backyard. And so, really feeling the work to give back and help kids, because the kids are our future and they're our future leaders. And so how can we, make a difference in their lives and give them the same opportunities that I was blessed to have. And so now, in 2021, at the beginning of this year, we're recording in December, I launched out to start my own consulting business. I was a director of development, went on maternity leave, and was really having conversations with people around fundraising and just nonprofit work in general, and experiencing my own experience with having two kids under two, and one having my adopted child having developmental delays. And so for the last year, about 20 hours of my week were dedicated, 15 to 20 hours of my week were dedicated to getting him services. And making sure that he, because at 2, he wasn't speaking. He had a lot of communication, but he wasn't speaking. And so now he speaks full sentences, sings songs. It's amazing. But I decided to launch out on my own. And again, and it's the joy because now I get to choose what organizations I work for. Again, all of them are youth focused and really hone in on helping fill the gaps that I've seen in my own experience working in nonprofits. So that was a really long story, and I don't know if all the pieces bridged together, but that's the introduction that I have to my experience in getting into philanthropy and where I am now.
I just loved hearing your story. Like you, I really was aimless in my 20s about what I wanted to do, and fundraising just fell into my lap. Nonprofits just kind of fell into my lap. And I love that you were such a go-getter and said, I'm going to go to Malawi. That's a really wonderful thing that you did, and what an experience you took home for yourself and for those lives you've touched. I loved hearing the story of Ephraim and what a difference he made in your life. I always say that giving boomerangs back to you, and I can tell that he made a difference in your life too. Mm. And another thing I like to say is you got to live the mission to fulfill the mission, and you are living, breathing, and working on that mission every day. I can tell your passion for youth services, for your own family. I just really am wowed by you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And would you talk about your story of philanthropy? I never thought of myself as a philanthropist, because when you think of philanthropy, you think of people who give millions of dollars. But I love this idea and platform that you're offering. And thank you so much for allowing me to share part of my story.
I wanted to call myself a philanthropist. So that's how it got started. Is I don't know. And interestingly, I'd love for you to talk about your work now, because I know that you really are about empowerment. And when I had become a young mom, maybe you went through something similar. I just felt bogged down with my work, unlike I had ever experienced before, and it got to be tiring and overwhelming. And I wanted to empower myself. And I really said to myself, you've made such a difference, and you should be really proud of yourself. And for me, that meant calling myself a philanthropist.
Yes, I love that.
So, and now your work with the Savvy Fundraiser, Can you tell me, do you empower nonprofit leaders to in the work that they're doing, or do you also provide fundraising services? I think you do a little bit of both. Is that right?
Yes, I do a little bit of both, and I'm actually in the process of refining my services. But the I focus on two things. So one of them is the emotional connection process. It's all about conflict resolution and better communication. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a board who hired me because they wanted to fundraise. We all know boards and fundraising, like that's a taboo topic. And, we all struggle with that across the board. And the problem was that it wasn't fundraising that was the issue. And I think mostly across the board, your board doesn't fundraise because they're not engaged with each other and they're not engaged with the mission. And there was a conflict with this board between a few members. And so when after doing some interviews, I was like, you can't fundraise. Like there are some things that are fundamentally, I wouldn't say wrong, but there's conflict within your board that is preventing you from making strategic decisions. And if you're not committed to each other or committed to the work out of fear, like you're not going to go out and ask your friends to give. And so what I did was, really bring them together. And there was conflict because they were all operating in silos and they didn't know what each other were working towards. And so they all were like, well, I'm doing more. This person's not doing anything. And so it was really helping them slow down and understand what was going on for them. So if someone had an outburst, like understanding what's your fear, like what is coming up for you. And again, this is part of the emotional connection process, which is understanding the language of emotions, understanding that with each other. So the light bulb clicked when they understood each of their fears. So someone had a fear that all the hard work they were putting in, once they stepped down from the board, was going to dissolve and the organization was going to go away. And so the way that she was outbursting, which we all do, when we have heightened emotions, we either withdraw, which I'm a withdrawer. So I just shut down and completely go away, where other people pursue. So she was, going after people, for lack of a better term. And again, it was because her amygdala was turned on. And so she couldn't even think logically out of her prefrontal cortex. So it was about slowing down that emotion. And so she could logically think. And again, it's biological, it's how your brain works. And so once we got those fears out, people started to understand each other. And then they started to listen to each other, because oftentimes when we have that, we're so quick to think of our agenda and like what we want to get across and we want to be understood. And so it's really beautiful and again, I use this to empower not only boards, but leaders. Like I had another director of development who was really stressed out. And I was like, hey, let's just slow this down and go through this process. I've also used it in my own relationships. If we have like a conflict, I'm like, okay, when I said this, what came up for you? Like you didn't feel validated, or you need to hear affirmation from me. And so it's really understanding each other, and like it leads to better communication because we're slowing down that amygdala, and then we're calming down that amygdala, and then we're able to make better decisions. And so I've seen it in my work that once people do that, like they can fundraise, because we can't, if our prefrontal cortex is hijacked, like we can't make logical decisions. We can't collaborate. We can't communicate with each other and with the external world. And so it's really been beneficial. And then, one of the things that I'm really honing down on is like, what services do I want to offer? What brings me joy? Because as a consultant, I get to choose. And I found myself this last year, like as a nonprofit fundraiser and someone who's experienced burnout, still in that same pattern of having to do it all. Like the other day, it was like 10 p.m. I was supposed to be on a flight that next morning at like 6 a.m. And I was doing a mail merge for a client. And I was like, I don't have to do this anymore. Like I get to draw the line and have that boundary. And so that's part of this work too of the EMC process, but just overall, like helping nonprofits resolve some of those issues. So like we're in December and generally it's year-end appeal time, and I would be stressed the F out until December 31st. But I don't have work right now because I've helped my nonprofits like get the work done ahead of time and be more proactive and strategic, and also think long term of that strategy. So not just, okay, we're going to get to December 31st and we're going to have all these donations and donors. Like, what do you do January 1st? What do you do? Like, fundraising is an all year long process, and so what do you do the rest of the year so that you're not hustling December 1st to December 31st? And so that's what I enjoy, is really helping that long-term strategy and being able to help people get off that hamster wheel of burnout and constantly having that emotional stress of not being able to think about only being able to think about like what comes next, not that long-term goal.
Haley, once again, I'm so impressed with you. I just love how you have this micro perspective of being on the ground in Malawi, and also this macro perspective of working with boards and that hierarchy of the nonprofit, and the consulting services you offer now, and the going back to Orange County after you in Malawi and working in that shelter. You offer so much, I'm sure, to your clients, to the fundraising profession. You're a volunteer. You volunteered for the Association of Fundraising Professionals. I'm sure you do other volunteer work as well. You are such an inspiration. Can you tell me, just because I'm curious, and maybe there's some other fundraisers out there, about your work with the Association of Fundraising Professionals? What did you do with them?
Sure. So, yes, I do volunteer a few places. My husband tells me I can only volunteer one place, but right now I'm volunteering in three places. And he's like, well, you got to get paid for some. So that's why I became a consultant. So yeah, I joined right when I came back from Malawi, Africa, and I joined their mentorship program because if you've ever started a nonprofit, you generally rely on like five people, and that was the five founding members. But at the time, they were getting a little burnt out of being relied on so heavily to fund the. They were super grateful and like still gave, but with any like founding organization, you need to branch out and do a little bit more fundraising. So I did their mentorship program, which was amazing, and I honestly still literally use what I learned then in my own consulting practice now. And it was like setting up the basis of a annual fund. So it was like understanding what types of gifts you accept, like starting a monthly giving program, annual giving program, like what that all entails, and then like a donor engagement strategy. So it was really beneficial for me. And I'm one of those people who like, if I'm going to join something, I'm going to give it all, because I don't remember the term exactly, but it's like what you give in, you get out. And so I want to get the most out of what I'm paying for, right? Like I'm paying for an AFP membership, so I want to get out. So along with that, I also served on the National Philanthropy Day committee and was doing their volunteers and program. And that was up until 2019. And I joined their board in 2018, I believe, and I was their DEI chair. So my work, and I think we've all experienced this over the last year, like DEI work is really hard, and it's a systemic leadership change. Like it has to start with leadership. And it was hard to start making changes, but what I found was a lot of people wanted diverse programming, especially in light of everything that's happened in the last 2 years, and like just talking about it. And so my goal and what I really worked on was bringing not only diverse program speakers, but also diverse programming topics. So we talked about like how to build an ideal board, so a diverse and equitable board. And again, that conversation was really about like, yes, you can bring people to the table, but like, what does it look like to actually have them included? And so that was a lot of our conversation too around DEI, was like, yes, as a fundraiser, we all know, and I had a topic on this between grant writer or nonprofits and funders, because we all know that there's 500 characters to explain your DEI. And you have to, I know for banks, for CRA purposes, you have to write out your demographics, right? But a lot of nonprofits struggle to hold themselves accountable, or they're just checking off the boxes. And that's also what I found on this board, was they were just checking off the boxes to win an award. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves, is people who just check off boxes. So if we're going to say we're doing this work, like, let's be intentional about it. And so understanding, like, what does belonging look like? How do you, once you invite people into the room, how do you make sure they're included and their voices are heard? So providing topics around that, and helping engage people, not just from a monthly luncheon, but all year long. So having different webinar topics, we talked about unconscious bias, and I'm trying to think of what else. But yeah, we had some really good conversations, and just, honest conversations about what needed to be done.
You certainly are committed to the profession, and I want to thank you for all your work with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and congratulate you on having your CFRE, which I have. When did you get your CFRE?
I got my CFRE in 2018, and I just renewed it last year.
Oh, great. I'm renewing it this coming year. So it's a wonderful certification to have for folks who really want to hone in on their fundraising knowledge and work for the betterment of the industry. So I am excited that you worked hard for that as well. And you mentioned a little bit about your source of inspiration being your family members, your parents and your grandparents. And I was curious if you could go back in time and tell me what that was like, when you were growing up.
Yeah. So again, like, I didn't really understand until I became a fundraiser, like, what the work that my family was doing actually meant. But I remember growing up, and it was formerly called the St. Joseph Ballet. Now it's called the Wooden Floor. And my grandparents were involved. And a couple of years ago, before they passed away, were put on board emeritus, because they were on the board for like way too long before they had board limits, but super involved locally. And I remember going to ballets and like local art performances of students performing. And also, my parents had started a few nonprofits helping serve. They started a house called Hope's House in Dana Point, California, which no longer exists, but it was to help moms transition from domestic violence and have a safe place to stay for 6 months to get back on their feet. And I remember going into the house and making sure it was all furnished and providing groceries. And so just having that like volunteer mindset instilled in me from a young age. And again, I'm still like reflecting on like how that's influenced me now, but I know that it has, because most of the work that my grandparents and my parents have done is around the same passion that I have. And it wasn't just about giving money. Like, my parents and my grandparents my grandparents were very involved with their time. So it was about getting invested in the nonprofit and understanding like the people that they were serving. And I was talking to my dad the other day, and he was like, yeah, I got like a note from someone that we helped sponsor. And it just felt so good to get that story and connect to that person, because we all know when we work in human services, especially youth, there is that confidentiality, and there's that line that we all struggle with as fundraisers of sharing stories. So it's just nice to have that like one-on-one connection. And so it really has influenced and fueled my work to continue to bring the legacy of my grandparents. And I might not necessarily give financially, but I can give of my time and my talents, which I've honed over the years. And yeah, it's just nice to be able to have that relatability with my grandparents, but also be able to continue on that work.
Something I hear often from my guests is the power of example. And I love hearing the strong influence that your family had on you as well. I'm so impressed. Your parents even started a nonprofit, and I love hearing how your grandparents were very involved with the ballet. The arts are so important, and what a special legacy I'm sure your grandparents left at the ballet as well. So, one of the my focuses for this podcast is to really inspire people to do little things in their everyday lives. And I'm just curious for folks out there who haven't gotten started yet, or maybe are thinking about doing something and not sure what to do. What is your advice for baby steps about how people can get involved?
Yes, I love this question because I think it's a something that a lot of people struggle with, especially because there are so many causes out there and so many issues to take on in the world that it's hard to know where to start. And as someone who grew up and my whole career has been in this, I forget that people like don't have the same mindset that I have. And so I'm just like, this is the work that I do. Like, and there's obviously a lot of people who want to give back. So I love this question. And I think it's coming down, and I've even had to do this with my husband of like narrowing down what we're really passionate about. So like you don't have to be passionate about it all, but is it education, higher education? Is it arts? Is it youth services? Is it women and children? Um, People experiencing homelessness, like the environment, animals, whatever it is, really taking that time to understand like what you're passionate about. And that's part of what it is for me is like what makes me angry, like what fuels me up and makes me like, I can't stand this if I don't make a change. Because a lot of people can, I don't want to make this sound bad, but like complain about issues, but like what riles you up, what makes you like mad, and then I would start there and like help that fuel your passion to make a change. And then there's plenty of resources out there to identify. I mean, you could do a quick Google search. There's also Candid, and you can research the organizations that are out there. And I would say start by volunteering and getting your feet wet in the door, or getting your foot in the door, and really experiencing the organization for yourself. So it doesn't, or you can, this Christmas season, and my husband and I done this every year. Like we started with our kids, getting gifts for a family during the holidays, or getting gifts for kids during the holiday season to make sure that they have the same joy that we do, or getting them shoes, because I take shoes for granted, but for a 16-year-old, having a pair of Nike Air Forces is a game changer. So getting involved that way and just starting small. But I would say, to wrap it up, is really identifying what you're passionate about, researching an organization, and then seeing ways that you can get involved. And it doesn't have to be, it can be financially. But I would say start with really getting to know and understand the organization.
That's awesome. I love how you asked what makes you angry. I hadn't heard about it that way, but that's such a great way to put it. Um, and so I'm going to turn the tables on you and ask you what does make you angry. Obviously, you're passionate about youth services, but I guess the question I like to ask my guests is, what is your vision for a better world?
That's a good question. My vision for a better world is where, this is part of my personal mission statement, but is where all children feel loved and safe.
Oh,
Because again, they are our future. And so, a lot of my passion stems around foster care, but also human trafficking. That's what makes, I guess, that's what riles me up is, when a kid is in foster care and they run away, within 48 hours, they're more likely to be picked up by a human trafficker. And so that's just disgusting and horrible to me. And part of them wanting to run away is because they don't feel loved or they don't feel safe. And it's to no fault of their own, right? Kids are innocent. they don't have to earn that love. And I know that, especially as a parent now, like I love my kids unconditionally, even if they're on the floor throwing a fit, like you love your kids, you show up for them. And so, how can we show up for those kids and give them a hope for a future? Because a lot of times the system deems those kids, they set up the life for them, right? Like if they don't achieve a high school education, they're more likely to be in jail or commit crimes because they have to survive. So how can we intervene? And especially as I've seen with my own kid, like it's really hard to get services for children, a child under 5. Like I've had to fight tooth and nail to get my child services, and we're privileged and enough to be able to have the resources to be able to do so. But there's so many proven statistics around getting kids services, early intervention services, to help them set up for future success. So, really fighting and advocating for kids and making sure that they have a positive future, because again, they are the future of our world. And so how do we give them that hope and give the rest of the world hope in doing so?
Haley, I'm just blown away by you. And I really want to hear from my listeners about how they've impacted them, because for me, I'm taking home so much. I want to go and have conversations with my husband about what else we can be doing, particularly for, like you said, tomorrow's leaders. One thing that I'm passionate about is mental health. And I love how you talked about the brain and the different parts of the brain and how we have to understand our brain in order to help each other and move things forward. So, Haley, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the work you're doing. I'm just feeling so grateful to interview you today. And I definitely want to keep in touch with and hear more about the ways that you are changing the world. You're a very impressive person. You're definitely a philanthropist to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jen.